Everybody, thank you so much for coming back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Ghost Rider, Spirit of Vengeance. Benny Wan Strikes Back is back once again to talk about another movie. This time I had him check out the sequel to Ghost Rider because we did a review of the first one together, so if you have not seen that review, definitely go check it out. We're going to hear from Benny in just a little bit to talk about what is honestly my least favorite Marvel-based movie of all time. This is my least favorite live-action adaptation of any character from the Marvel lineup, and the biggest bummer of that for me, like I mentioned in the first review, is that Ghost Rider has always been one of my favorite characters in the Marvel lineup. I always thought he was super cool. I enjoyed the lore and the mythology built around him and heaven and hell. And as somebody who grew up in a religious household, I literally went to a Christian private school my entire youth and literally graduated from a Christian small private school. I was pretty well versed in the Christian world and the Bible and all that jazz. So I've always loved to see what the Ghost Rider comics would do as far as taking these characters from the Bible and kind of adding it to the Ghost Rider mythology and making it pretty cool in a lot of ways. So I was always disappointed that the first film just didn't give us enough of that, and so I was hoping that this film would, and man, did it completely not deliver on almost any level for me. Let's go ahead and talk about the biggest positive that I have about this film, and that is the special effects. I think that the special effects done on Ghost Rider in this film are definitely a lot better than the effects in the first film, though I will say there are moments of the effects in the first film that I enjoy a little bit more than some of the effects in this film, but for the most part, I think Ghost Rider looks great in this movie. The fire, the smoke coming off of his head, and the fact that his jacket will be kind of like bubbling, the leather on his jacket will be kind of like ooey and gooey and bubbling from the heat, and I always really enjoyed that detail. I think he looks cool in any moment with Ghost Rider in this movie when he is full-on Ghost Rider, and all the action with him. All of that is really well done. That is definitely, without a doubt, the biggest positive that I can give this movie is that the visuals on Ghost Rider and the action around Ghost Rider is incredibly well done. With that said, the rest of this movie for me is a complete and utter train wreck. So this film once again stars Nicolas Cage as our main character, Johnny Blaze, who will go on to be, Ghost Rider, the devil's bounty hunter. And speaking of the devil, in the first film he was played by Peter Fonda, and I really enjoyed the way he played Mephistopheles, the devil, the guy who, essentially gives him this Ghost Rider power. And in this one, they recast him with a new guy. I don't even know how to pronounce his name, so let me see. Ciarán Hinds. I think his name is Ciarán Hinds. And so he plays the devil in this movie. And in this movie, they call him Rourke. And you might think, why do they call him Rourke in this movie instead of Mephistopheles like he's named in the other movies and in the comic books? Well, in this movie, it's essentially a sequel that is a reboot. You can technically watch this movie without having watched the first film, and you'll be completely fine because the movie opens up with a narrated recap of the events of the first film and kind of explaining where he is now. And they do that through some animated clips as well as some actual live action shot sequences where we get to see scenes from the first film, but they're shot differently. They're in different locations, and you have this new actor playing the devil in those moments. So right out of the gate, okay, this is a sequel that doesn't take the events of the first film very seriously. In a lot of ways, this is kind of a soft reboot, and I didn't really like that when I saw it the first time because I really enjoyed the first film for what it is. It's not a phenomenal film. It's not one of my favorite Marvel films, but as a fan of Ghost Rider, I think there was a lot that was really cool there, and I had a lot of fun rewatching it recently. So watching this movie was just such a disappointment because I remember going to see it the first time in theaters. The buddy who I saw it with, he was kind of one of those people who was kind of easily pleased with films like this. You go to see a comic book movie or one of these big action movies. We all have friends like that who would go to see a movie like this, and they just were easily pleased. If it had fun action and cool visuals, they were just in for the ride. You know what I mean? And that was just the kind of guy that this guy is. And, he's kind of changed a little bit since then, but I remember looking over to him halfway through the movie and telling him, dude, I think this movie's pretty bad. And he looked at me and said the same thing, and I remember it being kind of an eye-opening moment for me because here's this guy who, for the most part, was pretty easy to please when it came to comic book movies and big action blockbusters, and we're watching this, and he didn't like it either. And another thing, too, is I remember going to see the first Ghost Rider in theaters on opening day, and it wasn't like, the biggest showing of all time that was completely packed wall to wall, but for the most part, the majority of the theater was packed out, and people were laughing, people seemed to be enjoying the film, even though it didn't necessarily get like a huge praise as far as like its critical review and all that kind of stuff. But, there was a lot of people at that first screening, and then when I went to go see the sequel in theaters, there was me and my buddy and literally 3 other people. I will never forget that. And I don't know if it was because people just lost interest after the first movie, or because there wasn't enough marketing, or because maybe the reviews that came out early for the movie were kind of piss poor. Who knows? But all I know is that that theater was practically empty, and it kind of just told me everything I needed to know about this movie. This movie is just, for me, a train wreck that has great visuals and some cool action, but feels completely tonally inconsistent, not only to the first one, but to itself. It's a movie that I feel jumps around in its tone consistently, sometimes tries to be funny and just comes across cringy. Some of the action is cool, like I mentioned, but the lines of dialogue, the script on an overall level, and just the story, the 3-act structure is a mess, and this is a movie that I just can't help but be disappointed by every single time I watch it. Now, before we get to Benny Wan's thoughts on this, I do want to mention what the general plot is of this film. You have Johnny Cage, who's now in hiding in Europe because he doesn't want to be around anybody. He's starting to lose his mind a little bit the longer he has the writer within him. And if you guys remember from the first film, Ghost Rider cannot be around other people who are evil or wicked or anything like that, because the writer will want to come out, and essentially he kind of loses control when he becomes the Ghost Rider. He's this crazy anti-hero in that way. And, you know, there's moments where he has control of things, but for the most part, you know, when he's around evil, he doesn't really seem to have control. And not too long into the film, we're introduced to Idris Elba's character, Moreau is what I believe his name is. And yeah, he works with this secret organization of like religious, like monks, you know what I mean, of some sort. And yeah, he's been tasked to come and get the Ghost Rider and ask him to help save this mother and her child who are being chased by the devil and his henchmen. And that's essentially the story. You have the Ghost Rider, who doesn't want to be a part of this, being pulled in by this character played by Idris Elba, who works with these secret organization of monks who are trying to go and save this kid from the devil. And you find out more about why that is as the movie goes on. I don't want to get too deep into spoilers, because if you ever do watch this, it's one of those movies that as you're watching it, you just have this what the fuck kind of mentality the entire time. And yeah, that's the basic premise. Ghost Rider is going on this journey to try to help this mother and this kid stay away from the devil and his crew, and that's genuinely just what the story is. It's not overly exciting, and I think the premise could have been a little bit more. They could have done more with it. But yeah, I'm going to get more into my thoughts, but let's go ahead and hear what my buddy Benny had to say about this.
Hey everybody, Benny One, back here with Anthony. We're reviewing the sequel to Ghost Rider. We're reviewing Ghost Rider and the Spirit of Vengeance, everybody. Came out in 2011. It's the sequel slash reboot to the original Ghost Rider movie. So I'm saying that because this movie, to me, it literally seems like they tried to reboot the Ghost Rider franchise, because the original one wasn't received fairly well by the fans. Even though I actually didn't mind the first one, I actually thought it was kind of entertaining. I enjoyed the origin story. But yeah, so this is a sequel, but it's also a reboot. And the tone of this movie and the tone of the first movie are totally two different things. So they do seem like they're kind of two different movies in a way. They're just movies about Ghost Rider, basically. So Nick Cage is back as Johnny Blaze / Ghost Rider. He does a good job playing Johnny Blaze again. He's a little more cuckoo banana crazy in the movie a little bit, because he's been Ghost Rider for a while, and they do kind of explain that in the movie, as he's been, you know, the Spirit of Vengeance Ghost Rider for so long now that it's starting to affect him, like, as a human being also. So, and he's having a hard time keeping the, you know, the rider at bay and all that shit. So he does a good job in the movie. So David Goyer, the guy that wrote Blade and then helped write The Dark Knight, he wrote the script for this movie. And then you had the directors for Crank, which, love it. I love Crank, I love Blade, I love The Dark Knight. But him writing the movie and them taking it and directing it, probably not the best idea in the world, I would say. To tell you the truth, way different styles. I think David Goyer was trying to go for something different with the movie when he wrote it, and then you had these guys, Crank, who are they're great at doing these action movies. So the movie obviously has great action pieces in it. It really does, especially when they're on this there's a couple of them where they're on a highway and the Ghost Rider's on his motorcycle. And one of the things I love about Ghost Rider is when he gets in a vehicle, he can turn it into like his own vehicle and it all bursts in flames and all this shit. And that just makes for some cool stuff. And the Crank directors, actually, they do make sense for this kind of comic book movie in a way. So they do a lot of shaky cam shit though, which I'm not a huge fan of shaky cam in action movies. I'm not. I feel like it takes you out of the action scene because it's right in there and it's way too close and it's just shaky, 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 shaky. So I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it myself. I know some people like it, so. But I do have to say the CG effects in the movie are they're better than the first one. I actually thought that the first one didn't look bad, but the flame effect on Ghost Rider's head looked way better in this movie. It looked more realistic. And they had him wear gloves in the movie too, so you didn't see his bone hands with flames, even though I think there is one scene where you do see it. But I do think the special effects look a lot better in this movie. I thought they stepped that up for sure. His motorcycle's pretty badass in this movie. I do prefer the one in the first one, but the action scenes, it looks great. I really think it looks great. And I liked what they did with his costume in this movie. Like, I feel like it had like a freaking greasy oil grime to it when he turned into Ghost Rider. It wasn't like it didn't look like nice. And he didn't have the little spikes on the shoulders, which I found kind of interesting. So, but yeah, I mean, the movie had great action. The devil had a different person playing the devil. So that was a little, I honestly prefer the original guy that was in the first one. So, and it's a story about basically a kid where Johnny Blaze has to go after this child, and then all the devil's after the child, because I'm not going to say why, because I don't want to totally spoil the freaking movie, but they're basically all out after this mom and her son because of who he is and the meaning and the special meaning behind who he is. And he turns out to be something pretty cool by the end of the movie, actually. And then I kind of liked where they were going to take Ghost Rider from here, but this movie got worse ratings and worse reviews than the first Ghost Rider, so the whole sequel reboot thing didn't quite work out the way they planned it. So I thought it was entertaining. I honestly prefer the first one more than this one. So yeah, guys, that was just my quick little review. Thanks again, bro, for having me, and I'm going to send it back to you, and I'll be catching you on Tube laters, because we have spoken.
A big thanks to Benny for being in another video, my friend. I loved hearing what you had to say on this. Super glad that we did these two Ghost Rider films together. As usual, you guys can find the links to his channel down below in the description box. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. And yeah, let's talk a little bit more about this movie. So I already mentioned that the only thing I really like about this movie are the special effects. The performances are pretty bad. And even Nicolas Cage, what I liked about Nicolas Cage in the first one is that over-the-top Nicolas Cage was able to come out from time to time. Whereas in this film, since he's supposed to be a little bit more loony because he's had the writer in him for a little bit longer, I just feel like his character is just totally inconsistent for the first one, because he is just all over the place and he's doing these really big Nicolas Cage moments throughout it in the performance, and sometimes it works and a lot of times it just doesn't. And I don't necessarily think it's Nicolas Cage's fault. I think it has more to do with the direction and the script. Certain lines of dialogue, I don't care who you are, the way that the film was paced in these moments and the way that the actual dialogue was put together in these scenes, I don't really think many people could have made this script be pretty good when you're watching it. I think a lot of it comes down to the direction and how these actors were told to act. One of the biggest examples for me is Idris Elba's character, Moreau, who is this French character. And come on, Idris Elba is gorgeous. He's a fantastic actor, and he has a really badass and unique and easily identifiable voice. But they give him this French accent in the movie that feels incredibly inconsistent. I don't really want to dog on Idris Elba because I think his performance in the film is fine, but the French accent felt just unnecessary. It just felt unnecessary, and as you're watching it, you just can't help but feel like it just sounds like he's doing a caricature of what a French person would be like rather than doing a really good French accent. I remember just every time I watched this movie, and this last time, my girlfriend and I just couldn't stop laughing at his accent because it just didn't feel real. It made the scenes and the dialogue sound worse than it already did. And that kind of just leans into this movie's kind of biggest issue with me, is this feeling of inconsistency in its tone and its characters and accents. There's literally moments that are supposed to be cool and action heavy, and then there's moments right after that are kind of slapsticky and kind of dumb. There's literally a moment in this film where they're kind of talking about the fact that the devil has the ability to change bodies over time. So that's where you can kind of buy into the fact that he's no longer Peter Fonda from the first film. You know, he can kind of swap bodies around, you know, because the human body that he takes on for the time is kind of, you know, deteriorating. He can only live in it for so long, so he has to move on to a new human body. And they literally show kind of like a montage of different people. They're just like images of different people that he could possibly have turned into over time, or kind of hinting at the fact that he was these people at some point over time. Some of them are like dictators or old presidents, and literally at one point one of them is Jerry Springer, and then also this lady, I don't know what her name is, but it's this black woman that's like a meme essentially. I'll try to put the picture here so you guys can see it. But there's literally a scene where they showed this clip, that picture of the lady in the movie, and kind of hint at the fact that this is possibly one of the aliases that he took on, the devil. It just feels so weird at times as far as some of the humor. It's not funny, it's cringy, it's all over the place, and the narrative of this journey of him trying to, you know, save this mom and the son, you never really feel a connection. You never really feel like you care about their journey and who these characters are. Their connection feels essentially non-existent, and it's a movie that for me on almost every level is just disappointing and laughable. The third act comes so quickly, and it's not because the movie is short. It's your typical film length, but by the time you get there, you just feel like there was nothing that really happened with these characters for you to really be invested in their story. I think at the end of the day, this is a movie that has great effects and some great action, but an incredibly lackluster story with forgettable characters that are not engaging in an unengaging story. And I think that just leaves this movie to be laughable in a lot of ways, as well as just flat out boring. There's literally two jokes in this movie where they call back to the same joke. So I guess one joke, but they call back to it later on, where it's about Ghost Rider peeing fire. Somebody asked Ghost Rider, like, what happens, you know, if you have to pee while you're the Ghost Rider? And, you know, then it cuts to a shot of Ghost Rider from behind, like, kind of just peeing fire, and then they cut back to that joke later on, and it's not funny the first time and it's not funny the second time. I think the movie just doesn't really know what it is throughout it. Is it a movie where people are running away, a chased film, you know, where with this superhero character in the midst of it, you know, that has these demonic elements, or is it a comedy? Because at times I feel like it's a lot of things and it never really knows what it is, and by the time it feels like it kind of knows what it's trying to be, which it never really does, to be honest, the movie's almost over. And then when the movie ends, you just don't care about the events of the character's story. You don't care about what happens to any of the characters. The movie ends, and it's one of those movies that as soon as the credits start rolling, you're already turning it off. You know what I mean? You don't sit there and let the credits roll for a couple minutes and maybe talk to the person you were watching the movie with about it. Like, the second that the credits roll, you exit out and you're out. You know what I mean? And yeah, you know, I think the reason I have so much negative to say about this movie is I'm a huge fan of Ghost Rider. I'm a huge fan of Marvel comic films, whether they were done by Marvel Studios or not. And I think without a doubt, even the older Marvel-based films, you know, the original Captain America film or the Dolph Lundgren Punisher, even some of these films that are not great, they have this cheesiness to them that makes it at least watchable, to kind of just see how far we've come as far as, you know, comic book movies, and have a laugh at it. And this is a movie that, if anything, you're laughing at it more than with it, and not necessarily in a good way. It's a very boring and bland film on a story level. There's some things about the cinematography and the action and the special effects that I definitely gotta praise, but, you know, having this movie have no correlation to the events of the first film makes it have to kind of build its own story, and I think it just does not do that. This movie just feels aimless half the time. The characters are all stupid, and even the main character, Johnny Blaze, becomes unlikable and kind of annoying, kind of laughable in this film. And I don't blame Nicolas Cage, because he's a great actor when he's giving great material. This is just a movie that is just not great material. So yeah, guys, I'm sorry for rambling on so long, but a big thanks to Benny for being here in this video, and a big thanks to you guys for watching. So hit that like button down below if you guys enjoyed this video. Comment your thoughts. I can't wait to hear what you guys have to say. Do you like this movie? Have you seen this movie? Or do you even care about this movie? I definitely want to hear all of those things. And what I will say before I go is that I don't necessarily recommend this movie because it's good, but I do recommend it because of how bad it is. I think it's one of those movies that if you ever just want to shit on a comic book movie that is actually at least kind of decent, or at least good, but it's not what you wanted it to be, watch this movie, because this is the prime example of what a comic book movie should never be. This is a prime example of a bad comic book movie. This is a prime example of a bad movie that just doesn't allow anybody in the audience to give a shit about anything. So if you do like this movie, I am very, very curious to what you enjoyed about this film and what it is that grips you. I'm not going to make fun of you or anything like that. I definitely want to have that discussion. So a big thanks again to all of you guys for watching. Hit that like button, comment your thoughts, subscribe if you have not already done so, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.